Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' final series of the 2024 baseball season. A 3-game series against the Baltimore Orioles, where the Twins players put forth the same amount of effort they put forth in every game in August and September, even though the last two didn't matter. Thanks for listening. Truly, thank you for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins needed to win every single game remaining on the schedule against the Baltimore Orioles in order to make it to the postseason, and the Royals needed to be swept by the Atlanta Braves. Neither of those things took place. Therefore, the Royals, the Tigers, and the Guardians are all in the postseason for the American League, meaning that the only other AL Central team besides the White Sox not to make the postseason, Dan, are your Minnesota Twins.
What drama, what a game, what a finish.
Just a remarkable finish for the Twins, right? You know what? Here's what was kind of nice, is that the Royals didn't lose all 3 to the Braves, but they did lose the first 2. And so You're just like, man, this really could have come down to the last game if the Twins had put forth much of an effort. But it turns out, David, they are, like us, looking forward to 2025.
I'm so frustrated, Dan. We have a couple of things to talk about. First of all, my wife, Dan, not a frequent listener of the podcast. I wouldn't say she's listened too often throughout the season, but she did say in our intro, we should change our intro to say, two fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially if it's ever done by the Minnesota Twins, Dan. What do you think?
I mean, that's a little cynical. David, this was a team that finished above 500, 82-80 on the season. I mean, there's a lot
Dan,
really that we could...
Dan, I am in no mood for your sort of justification that this season was fine. That's not what this podcast is going to be, and let's just stop recording right now if that's the way you're going to treat this.
I'm not justifying. I've just moved forward in my grieving process to excitement, right, about next season. You just never know, David, what could happen with this team in 6 months.
Where does that fall into? I believe it's bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance, something like that. Denial is the first one.
And then excitement.
See, you're in excitement, Dan, but your excitement is actually denial, which is stage 1. That's the only way this makes any sense, Dan.
That might be. I don't know. Well, okay, so there's actually a lot to talk about kind of before we even get into the games here. First of all, Mr. Pohlad pronounced his faith in Derek Falvey, and then Falvey pronounced his faith in Rocco, and nobody mentioned Thad Levine. I don't know where Thad Levine is. Did he join Maroon 5 with his brother Adam? I don't know what's happening here with Thad.
It's like a pun. It's a play on words.
It's not a pun because they have the same last name.
Well, okay, what if it's not a pun? What English idiom language would you use there? What is that if it's not a pun?
It's just it's a funny connection, David, because they have
It's a connection, Dan. I'll give you it as a connection. Sure. Yeah, we'll talk more about Rocco a bit later. Yes, I am also concerned about Thad Levine's safety. Hopefully he's fine. Maybe, it's one of those situations where Falvey just finally... they'd always say Falvine, right?
Right.
Maybe he absorbed him somehow, and he's still there always whenever Falvey's on the mic.
But isn't it weird? Because we heard for years about the Twins' general manager, Terry Ryan, right? Terry Ryan was the general manager for, I think, half of my life. That's what Thad Levine is, and he's nowhere to be found. It's all about the president of baseball operations, Derek Falvey. It's weird.
It is weird, Dan. I was at the game Friday night, Dan, and I really like to be at each Twins game that's sort of consequential for the season as a whole, if I can be. And I took a buddy and his kid who's 7, along with my kiddo, and he had asked for some stickers from the podcast. And so when we got back to my place, I got him a couple of stickers, and he turns to me, Dan, straight-faced, a 7-year-old, mind you. He said, "You should change the name to Men for the Lose."
Oh, wow. A 7-year-old came up with that? I couldn't come up with that. That's very clever.
That's what I'm saying. Oh, man. Not a pun, I suppose, Dan.
I was going to hit the sounder,
strict.
but then I had to hold back.
Yeah, that would be irony, Dan, right there is what that one. I know that would be ironic. But anyway, I thought that was pretty entertaining. Last note here that we have to talk about because it's all over Twitter, Dan, and I saw this sign in person, but a fan had brought in 2 signs to the Twins game with him. One that says defund the Poe ... lads, and another that said penny pinching Poe lads equals Twins mediocrity. Now, the fan, Dan, posted a video of him being removed from the stadium and banned from games for a year. I've been following Twitter pretty closely. I haven't seen any resolution. I haven't seen the Twins make a statement about what actually happened here. I hope it's not a situation where like the guy was being drunk and unruly and like hit someone. The guy's making it seem like I brought this sign, they got mad, they booted me and banned me for a year. How petty and small if that's truly what's happened here.
That's a pretty bad look, considering that there were a lot of fans holding up really nice signs last year when the Twins made a playoff run. Like, this is their right to be able to come and complain about a team, especially because their complaint is that they slashed payroll, and we've been saying as followers of this team all year, well, it seems like they could have had a couple gaps that could have been fixed with that $30 million. And then when somebody points out, hey, actually, we were kind of right, guys, and you just silence them, you just smother them, and like take them out. That is a weird, short-sighted reaction. You could be so much more mature about it.
Seems like it. Like, and I understand, like, again, private property, they own the stadium, or at least the state of Minnesota does, or however that works. Like, they can control what happens within those walls. But I don't like this people making it like a free speech issue. Like, that's not,
Sure.
If a whole bunch of protesters showed up to Target Field, I'm sure they'd be upset about that too, for whatever they're protesting. But in this instance, they're talking about the team. It's not like it's some non sequitur, a different type of argument.
This is very on topic. Yeah,
it's not a First Amendment issue, folks. This is just a bad look for management issue is what this comes down to.
Well, I think that's all the notes we wanted to talk to before the games. And so I guess we can go into what we hope is going to kind of be a brief series recap.
Series recap.
Nobody wants to relive this, Dan. As I mentioned, game 1, I'm there. I see that the Royals have finished and they lost to the Braves. I'm thinking, okay, there's still a chance. Pablo is on the mound. He does pretty well. So he goes 5 2/3, 6 hits, 2 earned runs, 3 walks, 8 strikeouts, along with a home run given up. So top of the second, Adley Rutschman gets a single, followed by a 2-run home run by Ryan O'Hearn. The Orioles lead 2-0. And Dan, 2-0 in the second inning should not silence a fan base as well as that home run did. But everybody knows this offense can basically not score runs. So it's 2 runs, Dan. Seemed like there was no chance the Twins could win this game knowing that their season is on the line.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
It didn't find a way at all. I mean, like, it was a really remarkable thing. This is your ace on the mound, and you would think if there's a game that they can win in the series, it's gonna be this one. But they don't. Now, the Orioles did have something to play for here. They were trying to hold off the Tigers, and so there's an argument to be made here that this is one that certainly the Orioles wanted. We can't quite make the same argument for the next couple of games, but yeah, disappointing, obviously, to say the least. What was it like, though, at the end here when like people knew it was the end?
There were not a lot of people there, Dan. The split between Twins fans and Orioles fans, it might have tipped in the Oriole fan favor, to be honest with you. There was a lot of booing. There was just a lot of booing in general, Dan. Hissing, boos and hisses all around here for the Twins, the players, the front office, everybody involved.
Well, game 2 wasn't really much better here. The Twins lose this one 9-2. Zebby Matthews on the mound, and he does not have a great start. He just run out of gas. 3 innings, 7 hits, 6 earned runs, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, a couple of home runs. Now, the Twins were no longer using Carlos Correa or Byron Buxton in the lineup here. Though, interestingly, Royce Lewis was kind of like left in for this whole series to kind of like, I don't know, watch what had happened to this team when he was struggling. We're going to talk about him a little bit more later. But yeah, not a lot of great things about this one. I guess, Ryan Jeffers hit a home run. We'll talk about that later. But otherwise, this is all Orioles.
Yeah, game 3, Ober on the mound for his last start of the season. 5 innings pitched, 5 hits, 3 earned runs, 4 strikeouts, and a homer. The Orioles, they scored some runs at different times in this game, Dan. And then Carlos Santana hits a homer in the bottom of the second, just for fun, I guess. And then the bottom of the third, Deshaun Kersey, who we would argue should have been up for more of this season, had his first MLB home run, a solo shot. But again, it doesn't really matter. At this point, the Orioles still come away with this one, 6-2. And the season is over, Dan. Just to give a quick rundown here about some of the quotes that the media has gathered here. So first of all, from Carlos Correa, I'll have to sit at home for a couple of days and just go through everything that happened in the year. If you have anybody to blame me for going down for 2 months and not being a part of the team. I think that's one of the main reasons. Which, first of all, props for taking it upon yourself.
I want to build a championship culture.
Secondly, he's one guy. And maybe he would have made a difference. But Dan, even if he's hitting 1 home run every 3 games, I don't know that that's enough to salvage this season. I mean, maybe his leadership on the field and his defensive play, it's possible. But I can't imagine
I think
saying
it's actually very possible that if he had been around for those 2 months, that this doesn't happen. You think of the road trips that he probably didn't go on because he was rehabbing and he's not in the clubhouse. We tease the championship culture, but I do think that his absence did matter. Almost certainly. At least a couple games, and then who knows what happens at the end there. If they never fell out of the wild card position, I do think that it's very possible they win this series against the Orioles and they're able to go to the playoffs.
Maybe. I don't know if maybe I'm being extra pessimistic just because of the way this went. But another quote from Correa: everybody runs out of gas at the end of the year. The season is blank long. The guys that stay resilient and the guys that stay strong mentally are the guys that succeed. We did not do any of those things. Being tired is an excuse that's not valid at this point. So it's clear, Dan, from Correa's perspective, there are some other issues at hand here. It's not just that he was on the IL. I think that there's a lot to be said about the conditioning of this team. You're relying so much on young starters who've never pitched this much in their entire careers. There's something to be said about more planning, Dan, from the front office and the general managers, which we'll talk about in a bit here.
Yeah, I think the fact that they had to go to the 3 rookie starters down the stretch and in the bullpen and all these other guys who just have not been in these spots before, I think that was a really significant part. I have a hard time looking at the lineup and saying those things, except maybe about a guy, honestly, like Eddie Julian, who just had such a bad season overall. We're going to talk about him a little bit later too. But I don't know. I don't want to think about any of these Twins players that they kind of just gave up or weren't strong mentally at the end of the year. But he's saying that from within the clubhouse, so there must be something to stand on.
I think absolutely there must be. One other note is kind of tangentially connected here, but Christian Vasquez actually had to leave the team for a day or two. And the reason why is because his newborn son had to have open heart surgery. But I guess the baby's now doing great and expected to be all good moving forward. So that is fantastic news. Really happy for Christian Vasquez. Again, we dog on players all the time. We praise players when they do well. But honestly, we want nothing but the best for these players. And especially in a moment like this, baseball does not matter, right? If the Twins have 100 losing seasons, that's okay by me if Christian Vasquez has a healthy baby boy.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree. And then there's one more quote here from Rocco about the collapse. This will bother me forever. I will think about it a lot, and I will use it to motivate myself in a lot of different ways going forward because I never want to experience that again.
Oof. I wouldn't want to experience that either, Dan. We'll talk more about Rocco, but with that, let's go into our last Puckett's Picks winner of the season.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
Last Puckett's Picks, Dan, I took Margot. I really thought he was going to come back. I was so excited. Not the case, though. You took Buxton, who gets you the victory with 4. Margot had 2. The listeners took Correa, who had 1. Hogs took Larnach, who scored 0. But the Twins made a ton of moves after the game stopped mattering, and they just put everybody on the IL. They said, you know what, we're going to call up the entire Saints roster, and we're going to put everybody else on the IL. So Larnach didn't really play much in this series.
No, I thought it was really funny because then, Kersey came up, Diego Castillo and Michael Hellman came up, but then Diego Castillo was actually sent down for Randy Dobnak, who pitched the final inning of the season for the Twins. There's just something about that I think is hilarious. Jose Miranda was placed on the injured list. We even had a sighting of Cody Funderburk.
Yeah, it was bad, Dan. He shouldn't have stayed out on the mound as long as he did. We have so much to talk about with Rocco that I don't really want to talk about these last game decisions here. But the season is on the line. You have to win this game or the rest of the games don't matter. And he's after Funderburk is getting hit just like nothing. I mean, it's like the Orioles are oh, this is just batting practice? That's great. Rocco's okay, I guess the season is over. We'll just leave him out there. What are you doing? Use every arm you have in-house to get this done, Rocco.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
But that's because he used that bold strategy in the last series to try to beat the Marlins of all teams. I mean, this is a Twins team that went 1-5 at a homestand at the end, where if you reverse that, I think you're in the playoffs. I mean, totally flabbergasting.
Ridiculous, Dan. But I suppose if I have to choose a silver lining, it's the season standings, Dan, which I'm going to let you go ahead and read.
Yeah, so you did win it with 23.5 points. By the way, you got that half-point bonus this season 13 times. I think Hogs only got it, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. So that was a pretty significant difference because he actually outscored you on the season. He only had 17.5 points, but he had 243 points to your 240. But importantly, I held off the listeners here. I tied them in total points. This was kind of funny, 198, but I have 13.5 points. The listeners have 11.5. So I'm feeling better than I would, kind of like the Twins, right? I'm not fourth place. Well, I'm third and they're fourth, but there's one more team. Anyway, I'm not last in this whole standings. That's pretty good.
I suppose that's reasonable, Dan. With that, let's go on here. Beast versus bench, whatever that segment means anymore.
Beast versus bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
Well, so I took it in a different direction. It's funny you ask. I was looking at the last month or so when they collapsed. I think they lost something like 27 of their last 39. I mean, this was not good. So I'm approximating a little bit. I'm going to say that my beast here down the stretch was Bailey Ober, who a couple years ago wasn't allowed to pitch at the end of the season because they were worried about his innings. He held opponents to a 188 batting average over the last 30 games of the year. So we're talking about 6 starts here. Just remarkable. He demonstrated it once again. And this is what gives me hope about next year. They've got a 1-2-3 with Joe Ryan back and Pablo Lopez. That's among the best in the league.
Well, that's assuming that Joe Ryan's arm they've stitched back on somehow, Dan.
Yeah,
I don't know that
he's fine. He'll be fine. Joe will be fine.
Do we even know what's wrong with him?
No, not exactly. He's gotten lots of second opinions and things like that. But I have confidence that he'll be okay.
It's a grade 2 teres major strain in his right arm area. I don't know what that means, but he's expected to return in 2025. So
we've heard that before, David, with a little Alex Kirilloff, I believe. Some lingering injury that just never goes away.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
I don't know that they're going to chop part of Joe Ryan's arm off and sew it back together like they did with Kirilloff, but I suppose it's possible. Yeah, I don't really want to get too much into next season yet, Dan, because I need some more time to process. But what I will say about next season, Dan, is my beast is going to be the Pohlads. And hear me out
Okay,
for a second.
all right.
The Pohlads are my beast for saving money last offseason to be spent this upcoming offseason, Dan. I'm very excited to see what they're going to do. I'm sure the payroll is going to increase, and maybe in the long run, they figured they wanted to see if Buxton's hereditary plantar fasciitis turned out to be a problem, and it turned out it was, and now they're getting that fixed with some funky treatment. So I'm very excited, Dan, to see all of the moves they're going to make this offseason and push that payroll up into the 150 range.
You serious?
Yes, Dan, of course I'm serious. There's no sarcasm here at all. I'm very excited to see what they're going to do.
Sometimes you use sarcasm, and I can't always tell whether you're being sarcastic or not. But I'm pretty sure you are being sarcastic in this moment. Are you not?
Yeah, I'm so mad at the Pohlads. It's not even. And we're going to talk more about them because I had a buddy reach out via text who I love the buddy. Don't get me wrong. Terrible take.
Well, as for my bench, I'm going to go with Royce Lewis.
You were the chosen one.
Last month, he played more games than anybody else, actually. He played in 27 games. OPS .510. I mean, you can point to Correa. You can point to Buxton for, those guys being hurt, but you can point to Miranda. There are guys who have not performed well, but Lewis is the leader of that train of underperformers. Like, Royce, you came up so many times in those moments where last year you came through and this year, and maybe that's the difference, honestly. Maybe the difference between last year and this year is that Royce Lewis was clutch last year, and this year he just was not.
I do want to know, as far as MLB wide, where does Royce rank as far as guys left on base? Because my goodness, Dan, I think he might have set the record just in August and September. He didn't even need the whole season.
What do you think is going to be the impact of this year on him? And we joked before the season about sample size. This was an important addition to his sample size, was this slump over the last 2 months. Are the Twins better off signing him now and hoping he turns it around? Is he going to bust a little bit? I don't know how to read what has happened to Royce Lewis here and what this means for the future.
Well, he doesn't slump, Dan, from what I'm told.
Yeah,
that's not something that he does. You do wonder, Dan.
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
There is something to be said about saying something. I would say that that's not really superstition. I would say that that's a bit prideful. And so that I don't think is superstition that you should say something like that. But perhaps, as the proverbs say, Dan, pride come before a falleth.
I think that that's legit. I wonder what he's going to say in February when he looks back and he's had an off season. to be able to say, hey, I should have been better and I wasn't.
I'm going to go with Eddie Julian for my bench, and I think sort of as a whole here, in this series alone, he went 0 for 7 with 3 strikeouts. That's not a rarity, Dan. That's not the exception for this guy's season. This was a terrible sophomore season in general. He never looked comfortable at the plate, and he reverted to, honestly, a very poor second baseman. The first time he came up, we sort of forgave a lot of the mistakes he was making at second base because his bat was so hot. But if your bat's not hot and your defense that some would say was adequate towards the end of last season falls off a cliff, I don't know what you're supposed to do here, Dan.
I mean, his eye at the plate was supposed to be his great trait and his ability to make contact, and he just seems to have lost confidence in what he's doing at the plate. So I'm hoping that the batting coaches can figure out what he can do to find this middle ground. It was kind of sad to watch his at-bats late when it's like, Eddie, last year you were crushing those baseballs, or you were fouling those off and having long at-bats, and he just seemed to crumble at the end.
Oh, Canada.
You know, he gets an offseason away in Canada, eating Tim Hortons and drinking maple syrup, whatever else they do up there. Labatt Blue, is that still a thing
That's
they drink up there?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that he comes back refreshed and comes to spring training and realizes that he is likely fighting for a spot on this roster, assuming Royce is healthy, assuming Carlos is healthy, assuming Brooks Lee is healthy, and assuming Miranda is healthy, unless he switches to first base, which is a conversation we'll have to save here for the season wrap, Dan. But I'll say this. Carlos Santana, I think, is likely to win a Gold Glove. He was great for this team in a lot of different ways. There were some letdown moments. It wasn't a perfect season by any stretch. But to play this season at the caliber at which he played, knowing how old he is, Dan, is just super impressive. It wouldn't shock me if the Twins bring him back because we don't know what's happening with Alex Kirilloff. We don't know if Eddie Julian can realistically play first base. We don't know if they want to put Miranda at first base more regularly. There's just so many questions at first base. It's one of the few position player sides where the Twins are really sort of in a little bit of a rock and a hard place situation because these young guys you were kind of hoping who would pick up that mantle for the great first basemen of the past with Joey Gallo and Miguel Sano. Doug Meck. Okay, so
Ken Herbeck, I think is the name you're searching for.
Yes, that's got to go back here. Joe Mauer, Dan. You didn't say Joe Mauer. I'm shocked at you, Dan.
I was trying to go even farther back to the great first baseman.
Kiss the cows.
Well, with that, Dan, here, let's keep pushing here to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
I mean, at least we don't have to come up with a new title for the segment, Dan, for next season.
Thank goodness.
We have been told that Rocco's job is safe per the Twins. Congratulations, I suppose, are in order for Rocco to keep his job after the collapse they had this season and the collapse they had in 2022. But I do wonder, Dan, if it's not just on the players and if the manager has any role, it's to bust teams out of slumps and to help the team continue to succeed when they're on the ups. Is there not something to be said here that he couldn't get this team to correct itself during this absolute ridiculous final 2 months of the season?
Certainly he has to get some blame. I mean, because that is his job. You're totally right. That said, if you're playing Texas Hold'em and you've got ducks, right? I mean, like, what are you supposed to do with that? You can only hope that things kind of fall your way.
Ogres are like onions.
A quick follow-up, if I may, Dan. I don't play a ton of poker. I play some, and I've played my fair share of board games. Ducks? Dan, could you inform the uninformed listeners what ducks are when you're playing poker?
It's actually... well, that was loons, not ducks. In Minnesota, we call it loons, I guess. It's when you have 2 twos, right? So the only way that your hand is good is if a 2 shows up on the board. I mean, otherwise you have nothing.
I need... Real quick, this is a real thing. You're not making this up.
I'm gonna Google it right now because it's been a long time since I've played Texas Hold'em. But ducks.
I so hope this is just something that one friend told you sometime and you just hung on to for your whole life.
Let's see. No, that's true. Ducks. Yeah, I'm right. That was a big sigh of relief there. I was really worried it's going to be super embarrassed.
Oh, that's really disappointing, Dan, because that would have been one of my favorite things you've ever said if it was just made up. I'm a little bit bummed, actually, that it's something. Anyway, that being said, Dan, what do you have here for our manager of 2025?
Well, so I've always appreciated Rocco's ability to use language and rhetoric, right, really well. Like, as an English teacher, I really appreciate how Rocco manages. So this was his quote when I think he was asked about fans booing. He said, "No, because fans, I think, have a right to feel almost any way they choose. I believe that. Frankly, anytime we haven't had success here, I've heard them in the stadium, and that's part of working in Major League Baseball. That's part of managing a Major League Baseball team. And I respect the fans. Minnesota Twins fans showed me last year when we were in the playoffs amazing things that can change the outcome of a game in favor of their team. You can't have greater passion than what I saw. If I'm going to accept that and take that and enjoy that, then I'll also take the criticism when things don't go well. That's a great answer. I mean, like, it does everything. It acknowledges, like, the team's role in that. It dignifies the fans, and it runs in such contrast to what we talked about earlier, where you remove fans, and not just remove them from the game, you ban them from coming back for a year. This is a much more reasoned and better take.
Do you think behind closed doors, Rocco is just livid that the front office won't shell out more cash?
Absolutely, he must be livid, right? I mean, there's no other way to. I mean, look at the pitchers that he had. Look at the jiu-jitsu that they had to do to manage the bullpen over the last month and a half. He had nobody left, and that's not on him.
Okay, with that, let's go on to our Minnesota moment, Dan.
Minnesota moment.
I don't even know how we do this segment, but it's. I mean, was there any real Minnesota moment here? I mean, you'd have to look at the last 2 months overall to come up with like a Minnesota moment, I think.
I mean, this is all about irony here, right? So my favorite moment was Kyle Farmer pitching in Game 2 and the fact that he didn't give up any runs after so many bullpen arms, again, that I just talked about, have been called up, have been taking that green line over from St. Paul, and just they were allowed, like, you got to know you're going to play. If you're Diego Castillo, you know you have one shot here.
I am not throwing away my shot.
And then you're being sent right back. Like, if he just got a 2.5 hour pass on the green line, that might have been enough to get him like to and from St. Paul. He didn't even need the all-day pass.
Oh, yeah, accurate, Dan. I got to go with Game 2. Jeffers hitting a meaningless 2-run shot in the bottom of the 9th. I just find it funny. It's funny to me that he hit a 2-run shot, and it's going to make his OPS look that much better, Dan.
Clever girl.
I suppose. Pretty clever to get those stats up. I don't know if he's in arbitration yet, so maybe that'll help his numbers. Who knows, Dan, when it comes to the arbitration table.
No, that is totally ironic that of all the times in that baseball game, I'll take the 9th. Thanks, guys.
Okay, let's go here to Maurer's musings, Dan. I mean, I don't know that there's enough time in the day for us to ask all the questions we'd like of this team.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Maurer's musings.
So maybe this isn't going to be as joyful, of a sounder here to demonstrate what we're going to talk about, but I'm going to try it. Is that the last time that we're going to get to see Max Kepler, and we haven't seen him for a while, strutting his stuff in right field? And if that's the case, then who will be Max Kepler's heir in right field? And if that's the case, how will they decide who plays right field for this team next year?
We're about to begin bonding adamantium to weapon exoskeleton.
Oh, it's got to be Matt Wallner, Dan.
You think
He's
so?
got the arm strength. Yeah, I think so. I think he's going to be the everyday player. They're going to put him out there, and they're going to say, okay, we understand you're going to strike out a lot, play an okay right field, and hit a few home runs, and the job is yours. So that's what I think. We did have a listener write in, actually, and say that they hope that ownership actually allocate some funds to bring Max Kepler back. That is a long shot, I believe, that I do not think will take place. I suppose it's possible. I think that would be a weird use of money, if I'm honest. We have quite a few corner outfielders at this point. I do think we talked about Alex Kirilloff sort of in passing. We don't really know what Alex Kirilloff's status is, and we don't really know what role he'll play next season. He is sort of a candidate like Jose Miranda to come back from injury and to play really well. Now Jose Miranda's injured again. I don't really know, Dan, what's happening with all of the guys who could play the corner outfield or specifically right field in this instance, but I know they have enough guys that Max Kepler is unlikely to return.
But you didn't actually answer my last question about how they will decide who it's going to be.
Matt Wallner's bones are made of adamantium, Dan. Of course they're going to go with him.
Okay. Well, I do have to wonder, and this is a Tommy Watkins moment. Can Tommy hit some balls off of the limestone and have him and have Trevor Larnach and Matt Wallner and heck, Austin Martin? Can they have them all out there and kind of just hold it's like a game of pig, right? To see who can field the ball the best? Because I think that there has to be a little bit of a factor, like who can play right field at target field the best.
Oh, I assume they do an egg toss out in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Dan.
That's Jace Tingler's idea, isn't that? Or is that, sorry, I can't remember.
I don't know. I guess I'm less concerned about right field than I'm more concerned about center field, and the front office actually making a signing of someone who can play center field every day, as opposed to signing a guy who they say can play center field every day if Buxton gets injured, and then never have that guy play center field, which is a bold choice, Dan, honestly.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
I love that sounder. Where has
so
that
good.
sounder been in my life? This is as good a time as any to bring this up. Do you wish or do you think and actually use a soundboard in your day-to-day life?
Oh, it would be so good, Dan, but I would get into so much trouble because I would use inappropriate sounders at inappropriate times, but I would think it's hilarious. So I would do it, but I think it'd be a bad idea overall.
I think my students think that I do. Like, because just the frequency with which I quote other things, I think that's, maybe my students even have one for me. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be funny. Every time you say something, you got a kid in the back hitting the soundboard, but... Okay, so we're going to get into mine here, Dan. I got a text from a listener. I haven't responded to this text yet because I'm still upset about it. But so I'm going to read the text in its entirety so everybody can hear exactly what he said, and then I'm going to let you respond first, Dan, and I will follow up. So this is my buddy Jeremy, and he writes, the Twins' late-season collapse actually validates the Pohlad's penny pinching. Sure, you can say the team just missed by a few games and a break here or there, one less injury, and they get in. But the reality is they got exposed as not that good. So at least the trade deadline in action makes some sense. If you want to say that they should have done more last offseason, that's fair. Your thoughts, Dan Thompson?
The reason they weren't as good is because the Pohlads didn't spend the money to make them better. I think that's the simplest way that I can say it.
His argument here is that he thinks they weren't that good to begin with.
Yeah, I guess I can see that, but then lay out a clear plan for how you're going to be better in 2025. Aaron Gleeman asked some of these questions of Pohlad and posted his answers, and I thought this was really helpful. And Pohlad had no real actual commentary to add any meaning when he was asked about next season, other than just like, well, yeah, we're going to maybe not actually spend less on this team. Like, that's not instilling confidence at all.
No, and you would think with the way that the fans reacted and their attendance at the gate stand would do enough for the front office to realize that, hey, we're going to need to spend some more money here because the fans are upset that you were a few pieces away and you were unwilling to push the chips in when it made the most sense to do so. So if you're not willing to do it now, are you ever going to be willing to do it? Or do we just have to hope for a lucky season where we have all young guys who make no money and they just happen to gel really well?
Well, okay, so I think the analogy that I can give is college football coaches talk about how the places that win are the places that invest in football. And it doesn't really even matter the level, right? So Mount Union has been great at Division III football for a long, long time. That's because they're like the most invested in Division III school. St. Thomas in Minnesota, right, has invested and they're trying to make the jump. Schools that put money in the places that they value actually get value out of that. And this is the same thing with the Twins. If you're not going to put value in it, then you are not going to get as much of a good product. And I get that the Twins are mid-level, right? But we're not talking about the 25th biggest market in the country. We're talking about, what, the 12th or something like that? This is not a market where we can just say, well, you know what, there's not a lot of people here. Come on. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. Put a little bit more money in there. Get a relief pitcher. Get a backup center fielder. Go sign Pete Alonso. Do something to infuse just a little bit more into this team, and you've got yourself a championship caliber team.
It's quite frustrating. And figure out a TV deal that works so your
Yes.
fans can actually watch the team. I think we didn't talk about that enough for the remainder of the season. We talked about it when it happened, and obviously we talked about it at the beginning of the season, but the absolute cluster that this front office went through in trying to get a TV deal done when they did and then they didn't, and then some people could watch the games and some people couldn't. It's ridiculous. And honestly, it's very old media. Like, it's a very old media thing to have happen. Figure out your rights so you're not arguing mid-season. Are you insane?
No, and Pohlad is our age. I mean, surely he's streaming shows at home. Like, it's not like he's logging on to his Comcast account to try to get cable. I mean, come on. Pohlad, you know where this is going. Let's have a little bit of foresight. He's a businessman, for goodness sake. Does he not project out in his, or is he not actually maybe as hands-on as other people might be?
I mean, it's so hard. When you get these families of billionaires, Dan, you have no idea if the children of these billionaires are actually like well-trained or well-schooled, or if they just sort of fall into the positions. So it's like, yeah, they have a lot steeper hill to climb as far as like fans' appreciation of the work that they do. But Dan, at some point, when you look at the person's assignments and you see what they've returned, it's no longer a question about whether or not they're actually competent enough to fill the position. Clearly, this is a failure.
Yeah, I guess I don't want Jerry Jones level involvement here, but I want something quite a bit higher than what we've got. Or
are you kidding me? You wouldn't want an owner like Jerry Jones for the Twins?
Well, when was the last time Dallas won a Super Bowl? I mean, like,
this makes no... You're a sports writer, Dan. Jerry Jones is beloved by Cowboys fans.
Because why? Because he built them a really big stadium? I guess that's nice.
Because money has never been an object. He is trying. The fans
but my complaint about Jerry Jones is that he thinks that he knows football when he doesn't. I'm suggesting you want to have somebody who's going to invest in people who know baseball and give them the money that they need. Jerry Jones he wants to be the GM. He wants to be the head coach of the Cowboys, for goodness sake.
Okay, first, that's a ridiculous notion, obviously, because he could just make himself the head coach if that's truly what he wanted to do, Dan. I don't understand this. This is a crazy comparison to me. I would love to have an ownership group like Jerry Jones, who was so invested in their team winning that they wanted to be involved in all of the decisions and spend crazy amounts of money to do whatever they can. The only reason the Cowboys don't have every good player in the NFL is because of the cap. If there was no cap in the NFL, Jerry Jones would be bankrupt because he would have put all of his money into the Cowboys.
Okay, by that standard, yes, I do understand that there. I wish.
I hear what you're saying, that you're saying you don't want a guy who's not good at a position, making those decisions. You want somebody who's competent and who is well suited for the job. I understand that. Yeah. I just have a lot of problems with the comparison you're making with Jerry Jones because, again, it's a whole different ballgame we're talking about there.
Okay, so I guess
I hate that you're making me defend the Cowboys also. This is like the worst feeling in my this is like when I was cheering for the Yankees to beat the it's like a feeling that just hurts my heart a little bit.
So I guess the guy that I would rather compare to is I think I'm saying this name right. It's Peter Seidler, who was the owner of the Padres, who died last year because of cancer. But he was the guy who okayed the deals for Tatis, for Juan Soto, who has invested in the Padres, and people show up and, they fill that stadium. We've talked about this. I want an owner like that. But Peter Seidler was not trying to manage the San Diego Padres. That's my point, is I want an owner who cares and who is passionate, but knows where to draw a line between what he can actually do for the team.
That's fine. No complaints here on that. You kind of hit a button with me, I guess, here. But I'm because I look at Jerry Jones and I just look at the way that Cowboys fans talk about Jerry Jones, and it's like, oh my goodness, I would die. But people have that sort of confidence in the Wilfs also, which obviously we should mention too. Vikes are now 4-0. They should have beaten the Packers by 30 points, but through some very, very poor mishaps here, the Packers made it close. But the Wilfs, people like the Wilfs, Dan, too, because they're doing what they can. A lot of people were upset about the stadium, and there's a lot of little things here and there. But the Wilfs are doing what they can, Dan, to bring a competitive product to the field.
That's a good point. All right, well, we need to move on here to what might be our shortest segment ever, the series grades.
Series grades.
I truly think, Dan, if at the end of the Marlins series, you told the Twins players, if you don't have to play these 3 games, you could just go home. Is that how you would vote? Yes. That's how they all would have voted. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to be there. It was obvious. It's clearly an F, Dan. This is just so embarrassing.
I think they were rooting for the Royals were they, you could hear a quick little chant in the Twins. Did you hear that from your seats on left field? Let's go Royals. Clap, 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 clap.
Oh, what do you have here, Dan?
It's an F. Can we move on? There's lots of good things to talk about Herbie's headlines.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Okay, so this is weird. So we just have to mention this. The Timberwolves traded Karl Anthony Towns. That's a big deal. I'm not really a basketball guy, but I followed the Wolves a bit in the postseason last season.
I'll tell you the truth. I'm a little confused by your tactics.
I don't know if it's a good trade or a bad trade. It seems to be, there's a little bit of confusion among my guys who I know who do follow the Wolves, whether it's really good or kind of neutral. I think that for someone who doesn't follow a lot of basketball, I thought, I don't know, if the team makes the Western Conference Finals, I kind of think, do you really want to mess with one of the key players about that? But again, I don't pretend. Dan, there's enough people out in the world who listen to this podcast who think I know nothing about baseball.
Well, sure,
so how dare I even dip my toes into the water of the NBA?
I think now we know where Thad Levine has been, right? He's been at the target center, not target field.
He got lost on the way to work. We took a left instead of a right. This doesn't look like my office. Hey, could you sign off on this trade agreement?
Sure. Why not? Yes. It is curious. I hope that they're good because, again, it was nice to watch those playoff games, David.
Oh, man. So other note here that's sort of connected. Jeff Passan has been a longtime newsbreaker for the MLB, and now he is considering making a move to be the NBA newsbreaker. Now, Dan, as someone in media, can you explain to me how someone gets that position? Do like all the teams just know, hey, if you want to leak something, just send a text to this guy?
I think that's the weirdest thing, because if it's all about relationships, Jeff Passan has all of these baseball relationships, but I'm guessing like he doesn't know a lot of guys in the NBA. That is really weird to me. That suggests to me that, yes, he has reached like that, hey, you got to text Jeff level. But like, what is that text like? You know, you like if you lose your phone, you send an email to like all of your contacts and say, "Hey, I lost my phone." Like, is that what Jeff's gonna do?
He's like, I no longer will break your news for the MLB.
But if you could please send me like the phone number of the NBA GM in your city. Like, what is he doing?
I'm looking to form some relationships. Yeah, very odd. Back to baseball here. Luis Arraez, Dan, will win a third straight batting title for a third different team. And the reason why we care about this specifically this season, Dan, is it robs Shohei Ohtani of the Triple Crown.
Yeah, Arraez.
Money, do.
Thank you, yes. Arraez finished with a batting average of .314, and Ohtani was .310. Otherwise, he would have had the Triple Crown. I don't think we're going to hear Luis Arraez, chants for MVP, but his team is in the playoffs.
Okay, next note here, Dan. The White Sox have lost their MLB record 121st game. They finished the season with 41 wins. Hogs texted that he would have rather been a White Sox fan this season than a Twins fan.
This is because he's a Packer fan. Did he text that today?
Yes, he was very emotional today.
So he was.
I am worried. I'm gonna do a health check text just to make sure. Like, how many of those Michelob Ultras have you drunk, Hogs? Maybe it's time just to go to bed.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
This is the one you should have played here.
Have you no joy in your life? Is there no song in your heart?
That's true too, yeah. It's nice to get Hogs' voice on the podcast. 121 losses is a lot of losses, David. I mean, credit them for not losing the rest. After they had, 100? Like they won a few of those down the stretch there.
It was funny on X, the whoever runs the White Sox account just like sort of gave up posting scores.
Oh, yeah.
And so they'd say things like, the other team scored more than we did,
yes,
signing off for the night. Anyway, the last thing we need to discuss here, Dan, is the crazy National League wildcard scenarios. And now you may be thinking, Dan, if you're a baseball fan, well, the season is over. It's Sunday. The postseason starts on Tuesday. What wildcard scenarios could you possibly be talking about? Well, Dan, due to the hurricane and lack of foresight from the Atlanta Braves front office in deciding to not play these games at a time that made some sense, the Braves have a doubleheader scheduled tomorrow with the New York Mets. Now, why that's interesting, Dan, is because the Braves, the Mets, and the Diamondbacks are all currently tied for the last two wildcard spots in the NL. Now, what makes this even more interesting, Dan, is if either the Braves or the Mets sweep the doubleheader, the other team is out of the postseason. But if they split, Dan, they're both in the postseason. So the question becomes, Dan, how is this going to happen exactly? Like, are they both going to be trying super hard to sweep? Or if they win the first one, are they just sort of not going to play the second one to save the arms for the series that starts literally the next day? What is happening here?
So I don't know the level of hatred between the Mets and the Braves, and I kind of think that like fans will have a much more extreme feeling towards the team than the actual players will. Like, I don't remember any brawls or anything between the Mets and the Braves. Maybe some listeners can correct me, but I totally think that's what I would do. If I won the opener, I would not care about the second game because you got to play a playoff game tomorrow. Like in another city, I would think. I feel bad for Arizona in this spot because it puts them in kind of an awkward position. But, like, could there be any collusion here? Like, could the MLB step in and say, do you think that they're sending warnings to the teams being like, hey, just so you know, after you win that first one, like, you need to actually try to win the second one?
I mean, how blatant could they be about it, honestly? Like, if they're, like, actually, the funniest thing that would happen is if, like, the Braves tell the Mets, like, tell you what, we're going to win the first one, and then in the second one, we're just going to not, we'll just throw you softies. We'll make sure. And then, like,
where's that Twins minor leaguer, the 6th round pick, right? Who was tipping pitches to the other team? That's what they need.
No, but like, can you imagine, like, if they do have some sort of bit and then they just like, they throw out all of their A+ starters in the second game after they win the first? I don't know how I don't know how you police that. But I mean, it's just like in the NBA while guys are tanking for draft picks, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how exactly you can prove it out. I mean, I suppose if they are truly swinging at every pitch, like just to be done with the game, but I will definitely be following along Dan, to see what happens in these games.
Second game. I want to know what
these
happens.
These might be the most watched games in the regular season, Dan, and there have been some doozies this year.
I just think this is a mess for Major League Baseball that this situation even comes up. Like, this cannot be a good thing. Hurricanes happen, right? You can't count. I don't know. Like, this should have been preventable, and it seems that it was not.
Fascinating stuff, though, Dan. When you let 30 teams into the postseason, this is the sort of mess you're going to find yourself in.
This is the kind of stuff that.
Well, I think that's going to be it, Dan. We'll have a postseason wrap after the World Series, and then we're hopefully this season we're going to do a couple of more off-season podcasts as we talk about 2025. But my goodness, Dan, what a ride it's been. I'm sad that we're not talking about the lineups for Game 2 and who our starter is and how that's going to play out in the series. Instead, we're done, Dan, and we're just left on the couch watching teams that aren't your Minnesota Twins play postseason baseball.
But thank you, listeners, for following us this whole season. I think we take pride in the fact that we are able to produce an episode for every series. We were able to do that this year. We love baseball. We love watching and talking baseball. And it's really nice to have people who want to listen to us do it. So thank you for tuning in. We hope you'll tune in and listen to the season wrap. We hope you'll tune in during the off season, and we really hope you'll tell some friends, and so hopefully more people can hear us talking about this team.
Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win and find our Min for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or like, we'd greatly appreciate. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins! That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins!